So this video is focused on really shaping your Excel proficiency, and I'm going to be introducing you to two new Excel tools, and you're going to immediately implement them into your work for the week. And I'll also show you a little trick that you're going to use to really just make your life easier and automate a lot of the data entry that you've been doing. So just to reiterate, we're not covering anything new in relation to the business need today or this week. It's just focused on strengthening your understanding of everything so far. So the two Excel formulas we're going to get into relate to last week when we distinguished our revenue accounts by market segments. So remember this negotiated column and this wholesale slash group column? So they come from the guest data we used last week. When you did the work, these formulas had already been made. But this week you're going to make it yourself. So let's start with this negotiated column. So if you recall from last week, the people in our negotiated market segment include friends and family. So when you created your sum ifs formula, we made the restriction that everything in this column had to be greater than 0. The logic is that if a cell in this column is greater than 0, this transaction is then considered part of the negotiated segment. So this is all last week. So now we ask the question, where are these numbers even coming from? Am I just making them up? How do we even get them? So we need to first know exactly what makes a transaction part of this segment. So let's go to the guest data tab. Now, in order for a guest to be part of the negotiated segment, 3 criteria need to be met. So the first criteria is that our rate code, so let's go to that column right now, our rate code needs to be RACK. So RACK. That's criteria 1. The second criteria is that our rate needs to be $55. So as part of the negotiated segment, the rate that these people get is $55 flat. And third, the last criteria is that there can't be anything in this company column. So this company column later you'll see is going to be used for our wholesale slash group rooms, but as far as the negotiated segment goes, everything in this column needs to be empty. Now, these 3 criteria that I said are basically restrictions, right? We're designating specifically what these columns need to be, and I just showed you where these restrictions are. They're in these columns. So it sounds kind of familiar, right? It sounds like it could use the magic of sum ifs. But hold on here. Are we adding anything? Not really, right? We're not adding revenue. We're just trying to catch and note all of the items that would fulfill these 3 criteria. So because we're not adding anything, we can use the COUNTIF formula. And this formula essentially is the same as the sum ifs formula, where we ask what the restriction is and where the restriction is. But what it doesn't do is it doesn't add. It only counts. So we skip the part where we tell Excel what to add because we're not adding anything. So let's create the formula. Equals count ifs with the S, parentheses. Now our first restriction is going to be in column AJ, where we designate the specific rate amount. Remember, all of our in our negotiated segment, we all give them a rate of $55. So our restriction is 55. The second restriction is in column AI, and this is where all of our rate codes are at, and the code we want is RACK. So don't forget the quotation marks. Quotation mark RACK quotation mark. And our last criteria is in column AS, where all the company names are at. Now this next part gets tricky. So we want to put quotation mark, less than sign, greater than sign, quotation mark, and sign, quotation mark, star symbol, quotation mark. Yes, I know, it just sounds like a bunch of symbols thrown in together, but let me quickly decipher what this means. So whenever you see a less than and a greater than sign, like you see it here, it basically means we don't want something. So in our case, we don't want anything in this column, right? We want this column to be blank. So that's why we follow it up with a quotation, star quotation. So this star sign here means anything. So when you put it together, the meaning is we don't want anything. So we don't want anything in column AS. Now we actually have one more restriction, and this restriction is going to serve as a bridge between my guest data and my counting data. So let's go to the guest data tab and select column A, where all the guest names are at, and I'm going to designate the specific name of the transaction in my counting tab. I'm going to designate the specific guest name in the transaction in the accounting data tab. So this basically tells Excel, or this basically allows Excel to tell us if this specific transaction is part of the negotiated segment, if this specific transaction is going to fulfill our three criteria. And it should now make sense why everything in this column has to be greater than 0, because the transactions that are greater than 0 are counted as transactions that meet our three criteria. Now this is the next column. Last week, you used this column to determine which of the transactions should be parts of the wholesale and group segments. To do this, we set restrictions as the company names, so JBS, Amerilink, GTA, or Tarico, that tie to their respective segments. So how do we get these company names to appear in this column? So this is where the guest tab comes into play. So now the goal is to somehow get these company names transferred over properly. So now to do this, the first question we need to ask is, what do the two data sets have in common? So what does this accounting tab and what does this guest tab have in common? Well, obviously it's the guest name, right? You see it in the column here in the accounting tab, and you see it in the column here in the guest tab. So this is what the formula does, okay? We're going to use what is known as a VLOOKUP, and I talked a little bit about it last week, but if we use this transaction as an example, okay? So it first takes this guest name here, and then it does a quick search in the guest tab looking for where this guest might be. Again, this is why both data sets need to have something in common, or else it wouldn't be able to do the search, right? So after doing this search, it can mine the second data set for what we want. It can mine for that company name. So as you can see, for this guest here, it now ties to this company name right here. So recap, the goal is to get data on the company names in the guest tab. And we're able to do this because both data sets have something in common. They have data on guest names. So let's create this formula together. Equals VLOOKUP, parentheses. Now I'm going to first select the specific guest name that we use to look up in the accounting tab. Now this next part gets tricky. So we actually need to select a range of columns, because Excel won't know where to look if we don't tell it where it is, right? So we know it's in the guest tab, so we're going to go there now. Now the thing about this range that we're going to select is that this column, where all the guest names are at, has to be the starting points in the range. This column, where all the guest names are at, has to be the starting points in the range. So I'm going to click this column and I'm going to drag all the way through until I get to the company name, which is, again, the names that we want. We want these company names to be transferred over to the accounting data tab. Okay, now this next part really sucks because we actually need to count the distance in the columns between the guest name column and the company name column. And that's it. Now, the last part is we need to designate whether it's true or false. Now, I haven't really looked into exactly when you put false or when you put true, but it's always just been false. So I'm just gonna put false. If you ever come across a situation where you need to put true, feel free to let me know. But it's always just been like this. So it's just to make it easy. Just always put false in this last part of the formula. Now we've just created two formulas, but if you look here, there are an awful lot of transactions, right? So am I going to have to create each one individually? Now, what if I told you could simply just drag it down like this? If you notice, the formulas have now magically been copied. And it's not just that. Look, if we continue down the row, we see that the formulas properly capture the guest names for each transaction. So if I were able to drag it down and have the formulas automatically copy over, then does it mean that we can do the same for the journal entries that we've been creating? So let's try it out. I'm going to set the dates and the premium rates here for 2 weeks, as well as the formulas for the first day. And I'm going to just drag it over. But there's something wrong here, because when I click into the formula, we see that it properly captures these dates and it properly captures the premium rates, but it's no longer capturing our restrictions properly in the accounting tab. I mean, I don't think we've ever selected this column before, right? So here's the point. When you drag and copy formulas through like this, all of the cell locations in the formula also are going to get moved relative to the initial location. So when we dragged it over, it's great that these two cells locations here, the rate and the date, got moved because it properly captures the date and the premium rates. But at the same time, the restrictions that we set also got moved. So how do we fix this? Super easy, man. All you gotta do is place dollar signs on the restrictions, just like this. Watch. Now, once this is done, Excel basically says, hey, columns, you stay put, don't move. And now, once that is set up, we can properly drag it through. So your assignment for this week is to still create your journal entries, but trust, it's gonna be a lot easier now because it's automated so much easier. And I want you to create the COUNTIF and VLOOKUP formula on your own for these two columns. And in addition, remember our price list here? You can actually, instead of me manually typing these rates in, you can actually use the VLOOKUP formula to automatically have them reflected here. So when you do your work, I want these populated with the formula. And that is it for the week. If you have any questions or concerns, as always, feel free to hit me up. Thank you.